Trump to meet Zelensky as diplomatic efforts intensify to end Ukraine war. Good evening. As the year draws to a close, diplomatic attention is once again focused on the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to meet US President Donald Trump in Florida this weekend, amid growing speculation that the talks could mark a turning point in efforts to bring the nearly 4 year long conflict to an end. President Zelensky has said that a lot can be decided before the new year, suggesting that key decisions may be imminent. Tonight, we examine what is driving this renewed push for diplomacy, what is likely to be discussed, and what the possible outcomes could mean for Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and the wider world. The war in Ukraine began in February 2022 when Russian forces launched a full scale invasion of the country. What many expected to be a short conflict quickly became a prolonged war of attrition. Ukrainian forces, supported by the United States and European allies, managed to prevent a rapid Russian advance. Major cities were defended, and Russian troops were pushed back from parts of the north. However, despite years of fighting, neither side has achieved a decisive victory. Russia continues to control significant parts of eastern and southern Ukraine, while Ukrainian forces have struggled to regain territory at scale. The result has been a grinding stalemate marked by heavy casualties, widespread destruction, and mounting economic and political costs. Why this meeting is happening now, why are talks intensifying at this moment, just days before the end of the year? Several factors appear to be converging. First, the military situation. After years of intense fighting, both sides are under strain. Front lines have hardened, and major breakthroughs have become increasingly difficult. Second, political pressure, particularly in the United States. Washington remains Ukraine's most important ally, but support for long-term military assistance is facing growing scrutiny. Questions are being raised about sustainability, costs, and long-term strategy. Third, European concerns. European governments are increasingly anxious about the prospect of an open-ended conflict on their continent, particularly one that could drag on for years without a clear resolution. Together, these pressures have created a narrow diplomatic window, one that leaders appear keen to test before it closes. President Zelensky enters this meeting under intense pressure. His primary demand has remained consistent throughout the war: security. Ukraine is seeking firm and credible guarantees that any ceasefire or settlement would prevent future Russian aggression. According to reporting, Kyiv is pushing for long-term US security commitments potentially lasting more than a decade. President Zelensky has also acknowledged that difficult choices may lie ahead. He has suggested that certain elements of a peace agreement could be put to a national referendum, but only after a verified ceasefire is in place. That approach would allow Ukrainian citizens to weigh in on any proposed compromises, while giving the government political legitimacy for painful decisions. What is likely to be discussed, although no official agenda has been released, several key issues are expected to dominate discussions. Security guarantees. Ukraine wants assurances that go beyond past diplomatic promises. Any agreement is likely to focus on deterrence, ensuring that Russia cannot simply regroup and attack again. This could involve long-term military assistance, intelligence cooperation, and political commitments from Washington. Territorial issues. Territory remains the most sensitive subject. Russia claims parts of eastern and southern Ukraine, including areas in Donetsk and Luhansk. Ukraine has consistently refused to formally recognize Russian control over any occupied territory. However, diplomats are reportedly exploring the possibility of freezing the conflict along current front lines, postponing final territorial decisions. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, Europe's largest nuclear power plant, remains a major concern. Control of the facility has changed hands during the war, and it continues to pose safety and security risks. International oversight or demilitarization of the plant could form part of broader discussions. President Trump's role in these talks is central. He has stated publicly that no agreement will proceed without his approval, underlining Washington's influence over any settlement. President Trump has expressed skepticism about long-term military commitments and has questioned Ukraine's potential membership in NATO. At the same time, he has said he wants the war to end. Supporters argue that his direct negotiating style could help break the stalemate. Critics warn that such an approach risks prioritizing speed over long-term stability. Either way, his position makes him a key power broker in the process. Moscow's response has been cautious. Russian officials have indicated that diplomatic contacts are ongoing, but the Kremlin has not publicly signaled any major concessions. At the same time, Russian military operations continue. Missile and drone strikes have targeted Ukrainian infrastructure in recent days, underlining that fighting has not slowed. Analysts say Russia is likely using continued military pressure as leverage, maintaining strength on the battlefield while keeping diplomatic options open. Europe's role and concerns. European countries have been among Ukraine's strongest supporters, providing weapons, funding, and humanitarian aid. However, European leaders are not expected to be directly involved in the Florida talks. President Zelensky has said he would prefer European participation, but time constraints and political differences remain obstacles. Some European officials have privately expressed concern about being sidelined in negotiations that could reshape the continent's security architecture. Despite the renewed diplomatic focus, the war continues. Air raid alerts remain frequent across Ukraine, and civilian infrastructure continues to be targeted. This highlights a central reality of modern conflict. Negotiations often take place alongside active fighting. For civilians, there is little immediate relief regardless of what is being discussed behind closed doors. Possible outcomes. There are several possible outcomes from the Trump Zelensky meeting. One possibility is a preliminary framework including a ceasefire and principles for security guarantees which could lead to formal negotiations. Another is limited progress with agreement on some issues but major disputes left unresolved. A third possibility is that talks fail to produce tangible results, leaving the war to continue into the new year. Each scenario carries significant implications for Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and the wider international system. Global implications. The impact of this meeting extends well beyond Ukraine. For the United States, it is a test of diplomatic leadership. For Europe, it could shape defense planning and long term security strategy. For Russia, it may determine whether the conflict stabilizes or escalates. And for the rest of the world, the outcome will influence how major powers approach conflict resolution in the future. As President Zelensky prepares to meet President Trump, expectations are high but uncertainty remains. Whether this meeting leads to peace, partial progress, or continued conflict, it marks a critical moment in the war. With the new year just days away, decisions made now could shape the direction of the conflict and global geopolitics for years to come. We will continue to follow developments closely. Thank you for watching.